Hi BookTube, welcome to another fiction review. I don't have a long preamble today. I wrote this review on the Saturday morning following a very hot and unusually stressful week. So maybe I was in a bit of a let's just get on with it state of mind. Maybe also I was just thinking about the book itself, which had a lot to say, but in a small number of pages. And when a writer has that ability to produce quality reading with an economy of words, that always leaves me impressed. The book we're looking at today is Games at Twilight by Anita Desai, published in 1978. I read the King Penguin imprint, which came out in 1982. Can I pitch this book? This is a slim volume of short stories. Not everybody likes short fiction, and that might be because a collection of stories isn't unified the way a novel is in terms of its setting, characters, and plotting. You can, and I often do, to be honest, reach the end of a volume of short stories, and I find it difficult to recall more than one or two of them. And this was true for me, even with a book that was as short as this one. You might have heard me say in a previous video that I started and finished Games at Twilight on the same day, and that doesn't happen very often with me. Short stories are less work to review and reconsider, and I had time to review Games at Twilight, skim through the stories again, and when I did find a unity of theme. Desai creates characters who have not quite got it right, life, that is. For some reason, they have failed to grasp what is going on. They've got lost in a habit that no longer serves them, or they don't have many options for going forward. This failure might be no more than just a particular moment in their life, or it might be a pattern that is repeated over time. And I may be unfair, actually, to label them failures. When I think about it, a more objective description might be that their characters operate with different sets of values or priorities than their parents, their partners, their friends, their neighbors, than the prevailing culture. And so sometimes they're fine with this and sometimes they are not. Consider each story to be like a case study of how we humans decide whether we need to do something collective, act as part of a community, or whether we need to act as individuals. Now, of course, it is time for book details. My Penguin paperback edition was 137 pages long, and that had generous font size, got to be at least 14 point. I read the whole thing in under 5 hours, and that allowed for a little bit of rereading here and there. There are 11 stories in the book. They average about 10 to 12 pages long. The final story is the longest. That comes in at 30 pages. I bought this book secondhand. I may have picked it up at any number of places. I'm going to guess that we bought it on one of our many trips to Hay-on-Wye. And I'm going to guess also that it's been on my bookshelves waiting to be read at least 10 years, but most likely longer than that. Now, I have to show you this, everybody, because my Penguin edition came out in 1982, but I bought it secondhand in the 21st century. The effects of cost of living increases over time has been such that I paid more for the used copy than I would have if I bought it brand new. So here is a look at the inside cover where you can see the price that I paid secondhand, £2.50. And here is the back cover with the original selling price of £1.95. Now, if you were interested in buying this book secondhand, the ones I've seen on eBay or other online retailers, they're coming in with price tags over £3 for the most part, sometimes close to £4. So I could sell this crazy tiny little book right now and make a tiny profit, which is just, it's weird. Anita Desai was born in 1937 in Mussoorie, which is in India, in the foothills of the Himalayas. Her father had gone to Berlin to study engineering, and he met her mother there. The couple moved to Delhi after they were married. Anita, therefore, grew up speaking 4 languages: Hindi, Bengali, Urdu, and German. And she learned English at school. She began writing in English when she was 7, and she published her first story when she was 9. In 1957, she received a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature from the University of Delhi. And in 1958, she was one of 8 writers and poets who founded the Writers' Workshop Company, a literary publishing house in Kolkata, which provided a start for many new Indian writers. Desai's first novel, Cry the Peacock, came out in 1963. In total, she has written 11 novels, 12 as of last month, but we'll talk about that later, and 5 short story collections. In an interview she gave for the Guardian newspaper in 2017, she talks about how, at one time, a part of her believed short stories were failed novels. I'm quoting from that article now. But a short story is not a failed novel, any more than a novella is an extended short story. Each has an altogether different set of rules and effects. Length is one of them, but lengths vary wildly. As Hortense Kalischer said, how long should a short story be? As long as a piece of string, I mean to tie up a parcel with. When asked how she knew which kind of short story she was writing, Desai is quoted as saying, "It's all a matter of instinct, really, and exploration, a conviction that dawns on one while one works, that one has said what one set out to say. There is no need to go further." In 1993, Anita Desai became the creative writing teacher at MIT and told The Guardian she realized that short stories were more challenging when she had to help her students produce them. She was honored by MIT and is listed on their website as the Emerita John F. Burchard Professor of Humanities. Her novels have been shortlisted twice for the Booker Prize in 1984 and 1999. Her daughter, Kiran Desai, followed in her mother's footsteps and became a Booker Prize-winning novelist in 2006. Let's talk about setting. All the stories are set in India. The exact location is sometimes stated, sometimes not. Regarding those stories where it is not, I don't know enough about the subcontinent, and I couldn't say whether there are cultural or environmental clues which might help someone who knew more pinpoint the location. In all the stories, we are looking at different socioeconomic situations as well. Desai introduces us to the wealthy and the poor, the old, the young, the well, and the ill. The final story is particularly interesting because the characters are a white, wealthy American married couple. They spend time in Mumbai, in Delhi, and in Manali. They're affected by each location differently, and those differences start to reveal fundamental differences between them as individuals, which they didn't previously perceive. Those circumstances may be unhappy, even where stories are unhappy. I would say Desai's writing is very soothing because she likes to focus her settings in close on family life, and she furnishes each story with generous, very soothing domestic details. Food being shopped for, prepared, served, flowers planted out in the garden, clothes being selected to wear for a party, the activity of pets, the sounds that are made by neighbors, the difficulties of soothing a baby. This is the section where we'd normally look at the narrative viewpoint, voice, structure, language. Of course, viewpoint's going to differ with each story. There is some similarity in voice and how Desai uses language, and I think what might be best would be to give you a taste of Desai's writing, in case you've never read anything by her before. This is the opening of story number 10, which is titled Pigeons at Daybreak. One of his worst afflictions, Mr. Basu thought, was not to be able to read the newspaper himself, to have them read to him by his wife. He watched with fiercely controlled irritation that made the corners of his mouth jerk suddenly upwards and outwards as she searched for her spectacles through the flat. By the time she found them, on the ledge above the bathing place in the bathroom of all places, what did she want with her spectacles in there? She had lost the newspaper. When she found it, it was spotted all over with grease, for she had left it beside the stove on which the fish was frying. This reminded her to see to the fish before it was overdone. "You don't want charred fish for your lunch, do you?" she shouted back when he called. He sat back then, in his tall-backed cane chair, folded his hands over his stomach, and knew that if he were to open his mouth now, even a slit, it would be to let out a scream of abuse. So he kept it tightly shut. When she had finally come to the end of that round of bumbling activity, moving from stove to bucket, shelf to table, cupboard to kitchen, she came out on the balcony again, triumphantly carrying with her the newspaper as well as the spectacles. "So," she said, "are you ready to listen to the news now?" "Now," he said, parting his lips with the sound of tearing paper, "I'm ready." But Otima Basu never heard such sounds, such ironies or distresses. Quite pleased with all she had accomplished, and at having half an hour in which to sit down comfortably, she settled herself on top of a cane stool, like a large, soft cushion of white cotton, oiled hair, and gold bangles. Humming a little air from the last Hindi film she had seen, she opened out the newspaper on her soft, doughy lap and began to hum out the headlines. In spite of himself, Amul Basu leaned forward, strained his eyes to catch an interesting headline, for he simply couldn't believe this was all the papers had to offer. "Rice smugglers caught," she read out, but immediately ran along a train of thought of her own. What can they expect? Everyone knows there is enough rice in the land. It's the hoarders and black marketeers who keep it from us. Naturally, people will break the law and take to smuggling. "What else? What else?" Mr. Basu snapped at her. "Nothing else in the papers?" She muttered as her eyes roved up and down the columns, looking very round and glassy behind the steel-rimmed spectacles. "Blue bull menace in Delhi airport can be solved by narcotic drug." "Blue bulls? Blue bulls?" snorted Mr. Basu, almost tipping out of his chair. "How do you mean blue bulls? What's a blue bull? You can't be reading right." "I am reading right," she protested. "Think I can't read? Did my BA, helped 2 children through school and college, and you think I can't read? Blue bulls, it says here. Blue bulls it is." "Can't be," he grumbled, but retreated into his chair from her unexpectedly spirited defense. "Must be a printing mistake." This might be a good time to highlight the slow pacing of this excerpt, the time it takes for Mrs. Basu to get herself ready to read the newspaper. This is very typical of the stories in the book, and it's another characteristic of her writing, which I think gives that sense of comfort, even when things are a little uncomfortable. Could this collection have a genre label? Well, you can probably tell from the excerpt that I read that Desai's stories, they are character-driven. They aim for realism, for intimacy, and for small-scale dramas, which nevertheless are relatable to larger issues. And what stands out to me about Desai's writing, and I'll go back to the Guardian interview that I quoted from earlier, Desai observed that occasionally one of her completed stories would come back to haunt her. And as an example, she mentioned a story that appears in Games at Twilight, and it's called The Accompanist. Desai says that this first-person story, which is told by Baya, a young man who's devoted himself to playing the tanpura, which is an accompaniment instrument in Indian classical music, but it's a background role, and this isn't an instrument that tends to do solos. And Desai says she found herself asking whether everything that she'd said in that story was what could be said about the constrained situation of living your whole musical career in the background. And the result of that thinking was a novel that came out in 1984 called In Custody. And she also said that her novel Journey to Ithaca drew heavily on ideas that were explored in the final story in Games at Twilight, which is the one about the American couple that I mentioned. And I also noticed that 2 of the stories in this collection contained very, very similar descriptions of a kitchen scene with a mother and a small child that's getting a bit cranky because it's hungry. And they were so very alike in their wording and what actually happened that it almost seemed as though she'd started with that scene and then 2 different lines of inspiration took her, and so she wrote 2 different stories relating to that scene. Is there problematic content in any of the stories? I'm going to say not really. The only thing I could think of is that there are a couple of stories which contain examples of 1970s vocabulary about ethnicity or disability, which weren't problematic at all at the time. In fact, they were the words to use, but they've since become inappropriate. And that's it. Any suggestions for related or follow-up reading? Anita Desai is 87, but she is still producing new material. Her latest novel came out last month, and it's titled Rosarita, and it's available right now in hardcover and ebook format. So that is my recommendation. And that is also the end of the review. Short and sweet, and I think very appropriate for August. As I'm watching videos myself, I can see some of my favorite BookTube creators are relaxing, filming from their holiday locations. If you're enjoying a well-earned break right now, well, I hope it is going really, really well. And of course, I hope it involves reading good books. Look out for another video from me coming up at the weekend. And until then, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.